Father, as we open your word, I pray that your Spirit would be at work in our hearts. Father, many of us will have come in and will be feeling weary or worried or concerned. Some of us will come feeling joyful and fulfilled. But Father, I pray whatever state we come this morning, we would come with hearts that are receptive to what your word says. We would come and be able to put our feelings and our concerns aside for a moment and consider what you have said and let it impact our lives. Help us to understand this book. Help us to see its application for us as we live today. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Esther chapter 2, verse 5. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered to Susa, the citadel, in the custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in the custody of Hegai, who had charge of the woman. And the young woman pleased him and won his favour, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young woman to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked into the front of the court of the harem and learned how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil and myrrh, 6 months with spices and ointments for the woman. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in. In the morning, she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was given charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go in to the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the woman, advised. Now Esther was winning a favour in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus, into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won grace and favour in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted remission of taxes in the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. This morning we're starting a short series, or shortish series, through the book of Esther. It will take us through July. Those of you who are here regularly will know that that means we're stopping in the middle of a series through Hebrews. So I thought I'd just explain quickly why we're doing that. The first reason is that it wasn't because I didn't think Hebrews was good anymore. It wasn't because I wasn't enjoying it or because I didn't think you were learning from it. I wanted to take a break from Hebrews, though, because I think Hebrews is quite technical. It's quite heavy going. You've got to pay attention to phrases and technicalities. You've got to really have your thinking cap on to understand each chapter and what's going on, and that can get a bit mentally draining over time. So I wanted a few weeks away from that, looking at something different to sort of refresh us. So when we come back into it and get into the technical details, we're sort of a bit fresher. So don't worry if you're looking forward to Hebrews 8, 9, and 10, and so on. We'll come back to it later in the year. But the second reason I want to look at Esther is because I actually think it's a really good complement to what we've been thinking about in the book of Hebrews. You remember that Hebrews was written to believers who are about to suffer, who are about to be persecuted, who were in this big empire, the Roman Empire, and were about to be attacked because they believed in the Lord Jesus. And it was written to them to encourage them and inspire them and exhort them to hold fast to the Lord Jesus, to hold in their faith even under persecution. I think Esther complements this. There's a number of features about Esther which are really interesting and set it apart from a lot of other books in the Bible. If you think through narratives in the Old Testament, you'll notice that there's only 2 books with narratives that describe God's people living as a minority in a big empire. In the Old Testament, you have Daniel, which describes Daniel and those stories living under Babylon. You have Esther, which describes God's people living under Persia. And the other narratives, they all tend towards Israel being their own country, their own little nation, and trying to survive as a nation, as a country. There are very few books which talk about how Israel survived and what they did as just a minority dispersed amongst a big empire. And Esther is one of them, and I think that makes it really interesting for us. In Esther, the people of God are not in control. They're not really in government, although maybe Mordecai is at the end. They're this community of believers who are small. They're a small fish in a really big pond, and they have to learn to survive in the empire. They have to learn how to be godly and how to trust in the Lord in the midst of this great nation. I think that makes it really interesting for us. If you go back 100 years, here in New Zealand, Christian ideas, Christian beliefs, Christian morals were generally accepted by everybody. The majority of the country would have accepted basic Christian truths. Today, that's not the truth. Christian ideas, Christian beliefs, Christian morals are now in the minority in our country. People even claiming to be Christian steadily declining if you look at the results from censuses and stuff like that. And I think particularly for Christians who want to say the Bible is God's word and every word is true, we are becoming more and more alien in our country. Now, I'm not saying this because I want to alarm everybody. One of the things that the book of Esther is going to teach us is that we don't need to worry. We don't need to be alarmed. We don't need to get overexcited and fear because we're in the minority. I'm saying this, and I'm reminding us of this, because I think that will mean for some of us we need to think a little bit differently about who we are in New Zealand, what the place we occupy as Christians in this country. If you're like me, and you've grown up living in this country, and you've lived in this country most of your life, you'll be used to everybody looking pretty favourably upon Christians. People who see going to church, even if they don't go themselves, they'll see going to church as sort of a respectable thing. People who affirm sort of the Christian ethic. But I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I don't think in the future Christian beliefs will be seen that favourably. I think they'll be seen as regressive and uneducated and maybe even dangerous. People won't respect the fact that we gather on a Sunday for church and have faith. The cultural powers like governments and organisations and celebrities, they're not going to pay attention to the voice of Christians. And so for those of us who've grown up here and who are used to who are used to being respected, we're going to have to change the way we think, change the way we act. And I think we've seen that over the past few decades. Every few years there's a new law introduced by the government that really goes against something that Christians believe. And Christians often rally to oppose these laws and write petitions and try, do something to stop these laws, which are bad laws, coming in. And there's often a huge effort by believers to make sure the Christian voice is heard. But at the end of the day, all these efforts don't really stop these things from happening. They don't stop these laws from passing. The government ends up just doing whatever they were going to do, whatever they set out to do. And believers are really sort of unable to do much because we're now the small fish in a big pond. And so at some point, being surprised and being outraged and things like this, it's going to be a waste of energy because this is the country we live in now. We don't live in a country that is Christian in culture and Christian in its morality. Christian ideas will continue to be a minority, continue to not be held by the majority, and we need to learn how to survive in a minority in this empire. And for some of us, that will mean a shift in how we think about our lives here in New Zealand, a shift to thinking like an alien, like a stranger in this country we grew up in. And so the book of Esther will help us learn that. Will help us learn how to live as a minority in this country under the empire. This book will show us what it's like for God's people to struggle as a small culture, as not a dominant people group in an empire. And so that will be good for us. It will be good for us going forward because I think the future will be unlike anything that any of us have experienced if we've lived and grown up in New Zealand. And so this book is going to be really helpful, I hope, and pray it's going to be really helpful, and I hope and pray that it will help us think about how we're going to act and behave in this country in which we live. And so the question we're going to be asking throughout the next month is, what is life like under an unbelieving empire? What is it like when God's people are a minority in a big empire? As we begin, I'd like to introduce us to a few characters. I'd like to introduce us to the empire. I'd like to introduce us to Esther. I'd like to introduce us to what this book is going to tell us about God. So Esther, the empire, Esther, and God. But before we start talking about the empire, just a quick note. As you'll see, we have started reading this book in chapter 2. It's quite a long book. It's 10 chapters long, and there's a lot of details in there which are really interesting, but not vital to the story. So we're going to be telling the story over the next few weeks as we preach through this book. We're not going to read out every single passage because it would make it either a lot of reading every week or a very long sermon series. So we're going to read selected passages and preach from selected passages which help tell the story, which means you have a great opportunity to go home and read the bits in between. You can go home this afternoon and you can read the end of chapter 1 and just laugh your head off at the king and his officials struggling to know what on earth they're meant to do because a woman hasn't done what she's told. And it's really funny and you should read it. But I'm not going to read it for you. You have to go back home and read that. And there's lots of stuff like that that is in this book that I encourage you to read. So all that being said, let's get into it. Let's talk about this empire that the people of Israel are living under. The specific historic empire that we're talking about is the Persian Empire. If you know about and like ancient history, I think we're probably looking at King Xerxes. King Xerxes of Persia. He's called a different name that's really hard to pronounce, so I'm going to call him King Xerxes because that's who I think it is, and I think that's who I remember. And if you know about history, you'll remember King Xerxes was the Persian emperor who invaded Greece, and there were 300 Spartans who tried to stop him, and there's that big, people know about that. It was an incredible sort of battle with the 300 facing off against an enormous army. And that's the time period we're talking about. You can see verse 1 of the book, this Persian Empire, it rules from India to Ethiopia. It is huge. It's massive. It's powerful. And this story takes place in the capital, in the citadel, Susa. It takes place right in the heart of this massive, powerful empire. This is an important sort of story in chapter 1, which I'll describe now. Early in his reign, Xerxes puts together this massive feast, or this massive festival. It's 180 days long. It's almost 6 months long. And the purpose of this festival is to show off all his possessions, everything he's got, his armies, his wealth, all his power and all his glory. It's to show off just how great he is. And after this parade that goes on for 180 days of all his possessions, all his wealth, all his power, all these things that make him great, the king then holds a week-long feast, a 7-day feast. And there's food on gold plates, and there's wine in gold cups. And the king sets out an edict which basically says, don't let anything stop you from drinking. And so here we have this king. He's been with his mates. He's been partying for 7 days straight. He's both drunk on alcohol, but he's also drunk on his own power as he's just paraded it before this massive empire for 6 months. And finally, at the end of this massive this massive party, he wants to show off the best of his power, his best possession, his favorite possession, his most beautiful possession. He wants to parade his final thing that he loves before the princes. And so he calls Queen Vashti to come and show off her beauty to the princes. We're not given details of what exactly happened, but remember that these are very drunk men and a very drunk king, and he's calling Vashti to basically say, come and look how hot my wife is. This is not a demure meet and greet. I think what we're meant to see in this story is a picture of objectification. In the king's eyes, Vashti is his possession. She's his thing. Maybe it's his best possession and his favourite possession, but a possession no less. And she's there to be used. She's there to be exploited. She's there to be paraded. Now, aren't we all glad that we don't live in a world where women are objectified and sort of valued because of how good they look? Aren't we glad that we don't live in Persia 400 BC? The uncomfortable truth is, I think, is that Persia 400 BC is not all that different from New Zealand 2021 AD. And it's because that's what empires are always like. Whatever time period they come up in, they're always the same. They turn people into objects. They objectify them. The empire will take creatures that have been made in the image of God and turn them into objects that are to be used and abused and enjoyed, but ultimately dehumanized. Women, for sure, but it doesn't stop there. All vulnerable people and unborn people and very old people, all valued based on what they can do, what they can contribute, how they add, what they can do for us, and dispatched if they don't suit our purpose. The empire looks at people and only sees what they offer, what they can do, what they can contribute. And it's happening all the time to all of us. You go to work and you're there because of what you can do, what you can contribute. All through life, that's happening to us. And when we look at people and just think about what they can do and what they can contribute and what they can give, then we're thinking like the empire. This Queen Vashti, she's maybe the most morally upstanding character in the whole book of Esther. She refuses the king's gruesome request and she doesn't come. She says, no, I'm not going to do that terrible thing. And for saying that, for refusing, she's literally sent away. She's stripped of her royal title, discarded and never heard from again. And this tells us another thing about the empire that we need to know, about the Persian Empire and about our empire. If you don't toe the line, you're thrown away. If you don't fit into the empire's mold, if you don't do what they expect, then you'll be discarded. The empire will use its power to conform everybody into its image. Or if they won't, they'll be gotten rid of. And so this is the empire. This is the empire in Persia. This is the empire in New Zealand. It's powerful, it objectifies people, and it won't hesitate to do away with anyone who doesn't fit in, anyone who they don't like and doesn't conform. And it will do this to you and me. Whoever we are, we will be squeezed into its mold. We'll be pressured to do the things that it wants us to do, forced into its shape, or we'll be discarded if we won't budge, discarded if we won't move. That is the world that we live in. That is Kiwi culture that we swim in every day. That's the reality of living in the empire. And that's what we need to be thinking as we go out to work, as we go out and enjoy time with friends, as we go to the shops, as we go about normal life. We need to be aware. So that's the empire. The second character I'd like us to meet, who we read about, is Esther. Now, this book is named after Esther, so we assume she's the heroine, right? She's going to save the day, and to a certain extent she is, but we tend to because the book's named after her, we tend to think that she's going to do lots of good things all the time, and she's going to be someone to be like and live up to. If you're a young woman here, you might be thinking, oh, Esther is going to tell me how I should live. And that's not true. To all the young women here, do not be like Esther. Particularly not in chapter 2. Do not be like her, and here's why. You all should do much better than her. Now that Vashti is gone, we'll pick up the story. Vashti is gone, the queen is gone, so the king needs a new queen, or he needs a new sort of very attractive female accessory for his life. And he runs a competition. It's literally a competition. You thought The Bachelor was invented recently? No, they've been doing it in Persia for thousands of years. What the king is trying to do is he's trying to find the most attractive woman in the land to be his accessory. And so he sends out his men. The men go and find all these young women, and they're brought into the harem, and they're taught how to be beautiful. They're taught about cosmetics. They're put on special diets. They probably get manicures and pedicures and these kinds of things. And it's all leading up to one special night. They're in there for a year of beautifying treatments for one special night. One night with the king. One night to impress the king. Now, we're not, again, told details, but they're with the king from evening until morning. They're not there to show off their piano playing or their baking or whatever it is. They're there to impress him in bed. That's their one night. One night in bed with the king to impress him. And there's 3 possible outcomes for this one night. You'll notice there that it's kind of suggested that there are 2 harems. So after a year in the first one in training school, you graduate into the second through this one night. And there's 3 things that can happen to you after this one night. First is you don't really impress the king, and you're sent to the second harem, and that's it. Never called back to the king, can't marry anyone else. You just live as a single woman in this harem and are forgotten. So that's the first thing, if you're unimpressive. Second thing that can happen, if you do impress the king, and you have to impress him enough that he remembers your name. If you impress the king in bed so much that he remembers your name, he might call you by name from time to time to come and spend the night with him. So if you're quite impressive enough that he remembers who you are, then you might be called back into his bedroom a few times a year or something. But there's a third option. For the most impressive woman, the one who completely wows him, she gets to become queen. She gets to become the king's wife. For the most beautiful, for the person that impresses him most in that evening, she gets to become the queen of this empire. So that's what's going on in chapter 2. That's what we were reading about. That's the competition that's afoot. And the reason I don't think any of the young women should be like Esther is because in this competition, Esther wins. She wins this competition. Her one night with the king is so amazing that she is made queen. And so this picture that's painted of Esther in this chapter is not flattering at all. She's beautiful, and she conforms to the beauty treatment, and she does everything that she's told, and she impresses with this pagan king in bed. She's sold out. She's drunk deep of this culture of the empire. She's let herself be objectified and let herself be used. She does everything she's told. And more than that, it's not like, well, maybe she was being forced, how do we know? But there are things that she chooses to do. She doesn't reveal that she's Jewish. She keeps that hidden. And so in a sense, she's disowning who she is, disowning her heritage, disowning her part in God's people to get ahead, to do these things. And we've seen the only way to get ahead in the empire is to conform to it. And that's what Esther does, and she does it best. She's sold out to the point of committing adultery and marrying a pagan king. And so that's where the story of Esther starts. With Esther being really a failure, a sellout, conforming to this ugly world that she lives in, adopting the empire. That's one of the things that makes this book so compelling for us today, is the imperfection of the characters. Often in this book, even sort of the seemingly good guys, there are question marks over what they're doing and who they are. Mordecai comes across as this faithful dude who's trying to do his best, but there's a question mark. At this time, he could have been back in Jerusalem, helping build the temple, helping build the wall, contributing to the efforts of rebuilding God's temple. Why is he in the capital of Persia when he could have gone back? There's question marks over all these people. And so they're very unlike many of the other characters we meet in the Bible. If we were to look at Daniel, which is set in a similar time period, a similar situation, we have these heroes like Daniel who seem to be sort of impossibly brave. They always do the right thing. They never back down. They're just amazing and they're inspiring, but I don't think we're as much like them as we are like Esther. I think this book is good for us to hear because it reminds Esther as she fails, as we see her sell out, it reminds us of us. It reminds us that sometimes we jump through the empire's hoops to get ahead. It reminds us that we may have taken a few gulps of the culture and it might be affecting how we live and how we see things. Think about your peers, people that you know from work, your friends, family, extended family, people you see regularly during the week, people are at a similar stage of life, the same stage of life that you're at. What are their expectations? What are their dreams? What are their goals? What are they working towards? And how many of their hopes and their dreams and their expectations and the things they're striving for are the exact same things that you're hoping for and you're expecting and you're working towards. The way you go about your work, the way you go about your retirement, the way you go about motherhood, the way you go about anything in life, is it by and large the same as what everybody else in Papakura is doing? Are you working the same hours, complaining about the same problems, taking the same shortcuts, worrying about the same problems? Is the empire infiltrating and conforming your life to its pattern? I think this may have affected us more than we realise in the last few generations. I think Christianity in New Zealand has regularly done this, regularly sold out, regularly conformed. One thing that really struck me, and I've thought about a lot since it happened when I was young. It was the anti-smacking law that was proposed by the government and is now law. I wasn't very old. I don't think I was voting age when it happened. But I remember it very distinctly because I remember the urgency with which Christians responded. I remember knowing people, friends, standing on the side of the road with signs opposing this law. I remember people going and doing letterbox drops. I remember Christians talking about it relentlessly with anyone who would listen. And I can still feel the disappointment which I felt with the church in New Zealand because of that. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that I thought they were wrong, it's not that I thought what they were doing was unimportant, it's not that I thought they were wasting their time or anything like that. The reason I was disappointed was because their urgency in opposing this law only highlighted our lack of urgency in bringing the message of Jesus to a world that desperately needs it. The Christians handing out pamphlets and standing on street corners and talking with workmates, they were happy to do it about smacking, but they wouldn't do it to talk about Jesus, to share the message of life. And I think it showed, the thing I saw is that the church was really just living by the government's agenda. Our urgency and our passion and our action came in response to what our government was doing. It wasn't coming from what the Bible said. It wasn't coming from what God has called us to do. And even though we were disagreeing, ultimately we were being motivated by the issues of today and the matters of the empire. We weren't being motivated by the fact that there's an eternity waiting for all. We weren't being motivated by the fact that we are part of God's kingdom before we are part of this country. So we're all conforming to the empire in one way or another. But there's good news. Most of us won't have sold out to the empire as much as Esther did. Most of us aren't literally in bed with the king. And that's good news, because if God can use someone like Esther, then surely he can use people like you and me. Maybe you don't see yourself, and maybe you're not as courageous and righteous as someone like Daniel. But God has a place in his plans and in his kingdoms for people who have failed, for people who are not that courageous. The same way Esther can be redeemed and used powerfully by God, it's the same for each of us. And it's because we worship a God of grace. A God who doesn't wait for us to clean ourselves up, who doesn't wait for us to be spick and span before we enter in his kingdom and can be used by him. A God who doesn't only use the really brave people to fulfill his purpose. We worship a God who uses and redeems people who fail, people who sell out, people who drink deep of the empire. God accepts people like us because of Christ, because of what he's done on the cross. He sent his son because we are so wedded to the empire that we needed something amazing to rescue us, to save us, to make us righteous before God. And because of Christ, God takes our weak and broken efforts and sanctifies them for use in his kingdom. And that's a wonderful message of Esther. It doesn't matter how far you've fallen, you can be part of a gracious God's plan. It doesn't matter if you feel like you've failed or sold out. God can use you for his kingdom because you have been redeemed in Christ. So we've seen the empire. We've seen Esther. The final character we need to think about in this book is God. And the most unique thing about this book in the whole Bible is that it's the only book that doesn't mention God. Through this whole book, you go back home and read it. It doesn't talk about God, and more than that, it seems to avoid talking about explicitly religious things. It doesn't talk about prayers, it doesn't talk about prophecies, it doesn't talk about priests, it doesn't talk about visions, it doesn't talk about the scripture. It seems like God is completely absent. It seems like he's not there, and it seems like he's been deliberately avoided. And yet the wonderful message of Esther is that just because God's not in the book doesn't mean that God's not in the book. What we're going to see over the next few weeks are numerous, seemingly unrelated coincidences. Bad stuff that happens, good stuff that happens, random stuff that happens. And yet all of it works together, which means salvation for God's people. All these numerous, seemingly unrelated coincidences, actually, each one of them is vitally important for God to bring salvation to the Jews. If they hadn't happened, then the Jews would have been destroyed and the rest of the Bible wouldn't have happened. And so God is there. He is sovereignly at work. But it's hard to see in the moment. This book reminds us that often God's sovereignty is silent. Often we don't see what he's up to. As we go about life as a minority in the empire, we're often going to struggle to see what God is doing, because it will feel like we're always losing so much ground. We'll feel like we're embattled and endangered, and we're not going to see, we tend not to see thunderbolts that strike down the bad guys and prophets that part the sea. It often feels like everything's down to chance, that the powerful actually control things, and we wonder, where is God in all of this? But Esther will remind us that it's not true. God is at work. His plans are coming true. Even though we can't see it in the moment, his purposes will come to fruition. Even though he's silently going about it, we can be confident that he is still sovereign, that he will work all things together for the good of his people and for his glory. The message of Esther is that the empires of this world cannot overcome the kingdom of God. That's a real comfort. It can be, and I think it will be, frightening to live as a minority. The empire can feel so powerful, and we as believers can feel so powerless. And increasingly, I think we have felt powerless against the tide of the culture. All of us are under terrible pressure to conform to what the empire wants us to be. And so we'll only make it if we're trusting in a God who's sovereign. We're trusting in a God who's working, even though we don't see it, even though we don't know it. We'll only survive if we have complete confidence in the kingdom of God triumphing over the empire. And we will. We will survive. The kingdom of God will triumph because God is sovereign, because he is powerful, and because he can use even the most broken people to serve his purposes. Let's pray. Our Father, we thank you that you are sovereign. We pray, as you have taught us, that your kingdom would come. And we look forward and long for the time when your kingdom will be triumphant over this world, triumphant over all the kingdoms and all the empires that have opposed your people. Father, we pray in confidence, knowing that this is what you will do. We pray in confidence, knowing that you will be sovereign over history and that all things will indeed conform to your plan. Father, help us remember this in the week to come. As we see things which alarm us and worry us, help us to remember that you are in control. Help us to remember that even though we fail, even though we sometimes conform to the standards and expectations of our world, help us to remember that we can still be of use in your kingdom. Help us to be people who are used by you for the good of your people in this world. We pray this knowing that you're sovereign, and we pray this knowing the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his name, amen.